Hello, Jamie. I am so excited to have you with me today and catch up on a really important topic around our Excellence in Childcare podcast. You are the perfect person to speak with about operational excellence, and we're going to dig into that. But first, tell the audience a bit about the 20 years plus that you've spent in early education and how that all got started and continues to fuel your passion.
Oh, I would love to. And thank you so much for having me, Lynn. This is such a treat. So I came into the field like many of us do as a classroom teacher. Way back in the day, I started with a classroom of 2 year olds and served as a classroom teacher for a number of years. I bounced around in different age groups and worked in single group classrooms and double group classrooms. Then I had the opportunity to move into leadership. And so I acted as a director for a multi-site program in Texas early in my career. And honestly, wasn't a fantastic director to start with. Probably didn't have a lot of the necessary experience leading people to be a super great director. But I learned a lot through that experience that led me into a couple different other opportunities in early childhood. So I moved out of direct service to kids and families and into curriculum development. So I worked for a national early education curriculum publishing house and wrote curriculum for all ages, and then served as the trainer and the consultant for that curriculum, took it out to the different state agencies for approval. That was when VPK in Florida and NC
Yes.
Pre-K in North Carolina was growing so popular. And so not only did I support the writing and development, but then I had to really be able to speak on the efficacy of that curriculum because I was presenting it to our stakeholders. But that was where I really first started thinking about, efficiency of scale, because now we've got so many people using this product, and how do I create a product that has great effectiveness with ease of implementation that is scalable across single sites or multi sites or districts. And that was really where I kind of got my feet wet in efficiencies. I did some leadership training with directors in early education programs and learned from the best. I always like to say that I was privileged to have a group of 20 of the best directors ever known to man, and they taught me so much about being a
Outstanding.
strong leader.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I had the opportunity to join a large national early education organization as the leader of their education team. And so education being hand in hand with operations, worked
Yes.
closely with the operators in the organization to build quality early learning programs. And then, of course, morphed into QRAS and quality rated improvement systems and making sure that our education program aligns with quality standards across multiple states. And that has grown and grown and grown into a very fulfilling and rewarding career where I get to support kids and families and teachers, and I love it.
Outstanding. You can hear it in your voice, the passion for what you do. And just a comment about your transparency of being a new director. I hear that so often where teachers move into a director role and they don't fully understand the role yet, and that's part of the mentorship. And we've come a long way as an industry in mentorship, which could be a whole nother discussion that we could spend some time
Oh,
on.
wow.
But the
Yeah.
area that you and I share a deep passion for, you talk about operational efficiencies. I talk and the scalability. I talk about repeatable processes and identifying
Yeah.
where those efficiencies and inefficiencies are. And we're going to really park there for the vast majority of today's conversation, one of many I hope that we're going to be having. But today we're going to talk about operational efficiencies and excellence. And so I think it would be good for our audience and for us to have a common language. When you think of excellence, we can kind of talk back and forth about this, but I'd like your definition of what that looks like in early education and ways that it shows up. So let's just start with your definition of excellence.
Okay. Well, you know what? I think that in early education and in any business or agency or nonprofit organization, right? I think it really all starts with our mission and our vision and our values and knowing, what exactly are we working for? And making sure that as an organization, that mission and vision and values are aligned not just at the org level,
Yes.
but that we bring that set of values to every level of the organization, from top to bottom and from bottom to top, because mission and vision bubbles up from our community as well, right? And we have to be sure that what we are considering as excellence at the org level aligns with what the community needs and what the children need and the families and our workforce, right? Um, I also think that part of defining excellence is understanding the parts in the whole and
Yes.
realizing that, particularly in ECE, we have classrooms and classrooms have teachers. We have leaders over entire centers. We have support staff and agency staff and legislators. And all of these individuals have an idea of what excellence is, and at the heart of it, we have to figure out how to exemplify that excellence in our work, right? We have to
Yes.
see how that, so knowing what each part of that looks like, understanding how those parts come together as a whole, I think is truly important. But for me, it really, boils back down to what's good for kids, what's good for families, what's good for our workforce and our community, and knowing that if we do the right thing at the right time for the right reason, that excellence is the result. That it is our outcome. It's not this idea or concept. It is the outcome. The outcome is excellence.
Fantastic. And as we talk about excellence, we share that same philosophy, which is, and we'll get into this a little bit about the what are the hallmarks for the end result, which is excellence. But I think for the audience that's listening, they might be thinking, Jamie's background is with multi-site, and even if they're a single center of excellence, to your point, whether it's at the classroom level or the school level, that all rolls up. If you are a national multi-site, or maybe you have three centers, or maybe you're one and you're growing, but that concept of excellence is something that, regardless of the size of your school, I think what we're talking about today is going to apply. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely would. And, I heard a very interesting statistic recently, that multi site providers make up just about 12% of our industry of early childhood, which
Interesting.
means that 88%, the far vast majority, are single owner operator programs or one or two facilities that are, under an umbrella. And so, if we think about excellence as an industry or excellence as a field or excellence as a commitment to kids, it's the 88% of those, individuals that are really leading the pack. um, but I think also, even in a multi site organization, each of our schools has a very unique culture and it has its own individual set of families and its own community. And so we have to strive for excellence individually. And again, those become the outcome of the org, but it starts in those single centers with those individuals who are so passionately committed to doing good things.
I couldn't have said that better, because we see that as well. And part of the communication with schools is it matters at the classroom level. It really, as you were saying at the beginning, your vision, your value, your core, your culture, that goes from, regardless of the size of your organization, right down to the teachers. And when they fully appreciate and understand what they're doing really is a component of that excellence, it gives a sense of
Yes.
belonging. It also helps with retention. And again, we could take that a whole nother direction. But thank you for adding your view on that. And so, as we start looking at the efficient operation, Can you give some examples of what that might look like? Some concrete examples of what operational efficiencies might look like that lead to excellence?
I will give it a good shot. How's that?
Perfect.
um, so, my kind of vantage point for most of my career has been on the education side of this business, as opposed to maybe the financial side of this business or the facilities side, right? And I think that as we look at those parts and pieces to the whole, one thing that we have to realize is that there are efficiencies in each of those areas of our business that are unique to that area of the business, right?
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
and so my experience and the things that I have practiced are largely going to be around the classroom. And that's where I think that I have been able to make the greatest contribution to the success of the companies that I've had the privilege to work for. But one thing I think that really sets the hallmark for efficiencies is making great product choices and offering great product training, right? So I think that we have to make good choices around the resources and tools that we provide our teachers. So good quality curricula, the right toys and materials in classrooms, the right
Yes.
training and the right delivery for those trainings, right? Whether it's online or in person. Um, and then the appropriate amount of um, feedback and
Yes.
coaching and tying performance and success to the overall excellence of the classroom, right? I think that it starts with just having good quality tools and resources in place, and then being sure that the right training has been delivered and that training and professional development is consistent and ongoing. It's not a one shot deal.
Yes.
Um, but then I think we also have to have the right tools for measuring the efficiencies of our choices, right? Um, are kids learning, right? Are we managing behaviors in a healthy and safe way? Do we see positive connections between children and teachers? And those types of things can sometimes be pretty difficult to manage. So, setting forth some metrics for success. What does success look like for you? And how often do you measure it? And what do
Yes.
you do with that data? Right. So I think
Yes.
those are a couple things that lead to operational efficiencies. The
Can
last
I
thing I would
can I just
mention,
pause
oh,
you
please.
there, Jamie? Because I know
Yeah.
we've got a lot more to say around this, but what really struck me is you're right. There's operational efficiencies around curriculum, around the financial, around daily standard operating procedures, around facilities, around branding. Those all are different ways of looking at operational efficiency. What I wanted to park on for a second is when you talked about the metrics and the frequency, and maybe you're going to go there, but I think too often it's depending upon the person. If you have a dedicated person, that's wonderful, but if you don't have a dedicated person, sometimes we say, okay, we checked that box, but you also said it's not done. So talk some more about, is it ever really done? And when you talk about the metrics and the frequency, if you could give some examples of how, in at least in curricula, that you go about doing that, that would help our listeners.
Absolutely. I think one of the most obvious and maybe easiest kind of relatable examples is how often we kind of do checkpoints for kids, right? So we do daily observations and we make note of some of their progresses or maybe some of their challenges on a daily basis. With that collection of daily data, then we look at over a period of time, whether it's a week or whether it's a month or whether it's 3 months. How consistently do we see that particular behavior? Did we see it once? Did we see it a few times? Or did we see it often? Because that's the difference between a random occurrence and skills that are building and the mastery of skills, right?
Yes.
And then over a couple of quarters, we might say, wow, on this developmental continuum, Have we seen major milestones? And are those major milestones in typically in widely expected order? And if not, what does that mean, right? So I think we can take that process that we know works with kids and we can apply it to practically anything that we're trying to measure in terms of efficiencies. So, for example, if we're trying to measure the impact of the environment in the classroom, on a daily basis, we might make some observations about how often kids were running or what centers did they choose on a daily basis. But then I take that data and I look at it over a week or a month or 3 months, and I start to see some trends. Well, lots of running happening just before breakfast. That's an area that I might need to look at my schedule about, or nobody's going to science, so maybe I need to pay better attention to that learning center. Then over the period of a year, I start to think about, wow, in the big picture, if did I accomplish my mission, my vision, and my values in this classroom, right?
Yes.
I think you do that with all things. You do that with your cleaning checklists. You do that with your, finances. You do that with your supply closet inventory. You do that with your menu. You look at it daily. Did kids like what they were eating? And over a month or 2 months or a year, did we have a balanced menu, and how do we know? But I think, like you said, it's the metric, deciding on the metric and measuring the same thing over and over
Yes.
again.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then, right, looking at small bites, bigger bites, and the biggest bites. And then understanding, what does that nugget of information tell me, and how do I use it to continuously improve? So you said, right, we're never done, and we aren't ever going to be done. Kids are changing on a daily basis, which means we never meet the finish line with them. We are always in the race with them.
Yes.
And similarly, in early childhood, we're never going to have this day where we graduate the kid who knows everything and has perfect behavior and solid relationships and ties their shoes with the best of them, right? We're always going
Right.
to be looking at ways that we can be more and do better. And not just in our classrooms, but across our organization as a whole and our business as a whole. We serve not just the kids, but our families and our workforce. And so we have a lot to do for them too.
Yes. And what you also spoke about is data and documentation. So you're looking for trends because you said, I'll take, as I'm looking at where children are spending their time, or like you said, around a menu or on a playground, you're taking data and turning it into information so that you can begin to look at trends, so that you can then say what types of what might we see coming, how can we anticipate changes that we need to make. And maybe you could comment about this, but perhaps we need to take a little pressure off our shoulders that it has to be perfect. If we're continually improving, it's not going to be perfect because we're always looking for ways to improve. Therefore, perfection is something that you're continually striving for, which leads to excellence. That's a hallmark
Absolutely.
of, if you're investing in continuous improvement, the net result is excellence. So,
Yeah.
what about that? I mean, there's a lot of pressure that's on us, but it's never completely cooked because we're striving for excellence, not perfection. Comments about that?
Uh, so many, but I think about, where does that perfect pressure come from? Um, and I think, the perfect pressure comes from a couple different, big bucket places, if I might. One of the places it comes from is we are an incredibly regulated industry. So we have licensing, we have fire, we have
Yes.
health, then we have funder stakeholders, right? So we are a very regulated industry, and regulation is generally written pretty black and white,
Yes.
and it is or it isn't. But it's people that are executing those regulations. And in our case, it's not even just people, it's little people, right? Every single day, we are surrounded by little people who are just learning how to be people. And they
Yes.
certainly haven't read that regulation guide on how many seconds
Right.
they should wash their hands. parents, right? So we've got this perfect pressure coming from regulation, but we have imperfect humans, and often little humans, that are being held accountable to that black and white perfect regulation.
Perfectly
We
well
also,
said. That's
yeah.
fantastic. That's a write down for me.
Um, you know who else holds us to perfect pressure is our parents, right? Because every parent wants the absolute best for their kid, no questions asked, and they should, right? I mean, we wouldn't want any parent to walk in and say, well, I'll take second best for my little one today, right?
Right.
So that perfect pressure is expected. And our job is to help parents understand that even as parents, we're going to have good days and we're going to have bad days, and kids are going to have good days and bad days. And we're going to be strong learners one day, and we're not going to be very interested in the ABCs the next day. But the one thing that we can do for kids perfectly is love them and care for them and respect them, right? We can
This
do
is
those
true.
things perfectly. And so I think that if we put the pressure where it belongs, which is to always do our best, always do what's right, and above all else, care for one another and be kind, then the other things tend to naturally come, because how we care and offer kindness to other people are through those regulations, right? And through that quality rated improvement system, and through health and safety. But the other reason for the data, Lynn, I think, is to be able to take the look at the big picture and see, well, by golly, there were 8 out of 10 days that I was perfect, right? I checked all of those
Yes.
boxes. I got it all done. When I see only the daily data and I remember that one day that I didn't get it right, it tends to color all the rest of it.
This is so
So
true.
in collecting data over time, we are able to give ourselves a break. And more importantly than that, we're able to celebrate the enormous proportion of yay good times versus the smaller, less frequent occasions of challenge and strife.
That is something to really highlight because data isn't intended to find the holes, although that is a key part of it. But it's also to look at what quality looks like, what best looks like, how do you replicate that? And to create the back to the very beginning of our conversation, part of your culture says, why do we care about these things? So we
Yes.
can celebrate the successes so that we can see where we're excelling. So it's really part of that motivation as much of what we're moving toward, as it is identifying where there's gaps or liabilities that we want to mitigate risk, those types of things. Yes, from a business perspective, that's true, but the teacher also needs to be able to see, wow, I really nailed it. To your point, we don't want them parking on that one bad day. It's look at over time. And that's contagious when you start celebrating those successes. As you well know, that's contagious. Oh, looks like you just,
Oh, yes, I am on a timer light and my timer light just went out.
well,
So I think we'll be okay. But I guess I could do some jumping jacks and see if I
feel free. We'll just,
can.
this is our stretch moment in the middle of our podcast today. Feel free to get up and move
Um,
about if you need to, ladies and gentlemen. So, Jamie, as we're wrapping up on our session today, I'd like to hear your thoughts as we look at the future of early education and what are the big issues? We know staffing is an issue, so if we can kind of put that one on, it is part of it, workforce is part of it, but kind of what you see the industry is facing and areas of opportunity, not just the challenges, but areas of opportunity going forward. What's your prediction and what are you seeing?
sure. I think that there are a couple things. I have appreciated so much our conversation as it relates to continuous quality improvement, and data, because I think that one of the things that is the absolute essential and necessary byproduct of innovation is continuous quality improvement and data informed decision making, right?
Yes.
We are a field and a profession of hearts. And that's one of the things that makes us so very special in early childhood. But we have to begin to have data that supports all the things that our heart knows to be true.
Yes.
Because as technology improves and as more and more funding sources are getting into this game, and as our families and our teachers become more and more interested and expectant of data, we have to be able to provide it, right? And the generations of parents and leaders today have grown up in a data infused
This is true.
world. And so when we don't know how much of this and how frequent that, and when we don't rate kids on scales, and when we don't have star ratings, it becomes suspect because they're so expectant of the data, right, to make a
Yes.
decision. I mean, we all go to Yelp to see which restaurants have a 4-star review, and that's just to decide what dinner we're having. So imagine the impact of data when making a decision for your family and for your child and for your business.
Yes.
So, one thing I think we have to figure out is, what are we going to measure as an industry so that we are comparing apples to apples and that we're really able to speak about quality indicators? Because for me, a quality indicator has to be replicated, Lynn. You
Yes, it
you said
does.
it just a minute ago, right? If it cannot be replicated, then I shouldn't consider it a quality indicator, because only someone extra special with extra special talent or extra special resources is going to be able to get it. Like, quality is deserved by everyone, which means that it needs to be replicable.
Yes.
Um, the other thing is the idea of continuous quality improvement. I think, sometimes look at things as it's always been this way, or we've always done it
Yes.
this way. And maybe, in our field, kids are kids and we love them the same as we always have. But there's not always a ton of truth to that. Kids have changed a whole lot since I was a 2-year-old teacher in the
Yes.
late 90s. And so have teachers, and so have parents, so have our communities, right? And more importantly, so has resource and research and opportunity and innovation. And why wouldn't we want to take advantage of all this beautiful new stuff that we know about learning and brain science and the way that kids engage with adults and with one another, and apply that to our classroom, but
Yes.
also to our business, right? Because what's happening in our classroom is our business. It is what makes us successful on our ledger, is the quality that's happening in our classroom. So I think data, continuous quality improvement leads to sustainability. It's something we can replicate over and over and over. But then I think too, we have to start looking at the return on investment, right? And that's a term that
Always.
is in business everywhere. But we don't like to think of ourselves as a business. We like to think of ourselves as, again, these people full of heart and warm fuzzies. But it, I assume that this audience is an audience of leaders who want to be successful, right? And return on investment isn't necessarily a dollars and a cents, but it's,
No.
what are the outcomes for kids? What are the outcomes for our workforce and our community? And what's meaningful to them? And how do we prove to our stakeholders that we have accomplished that?
Yes.
Is it evidence of learning? Is it data on the growth continuum? Is it, dollars and cents or market share or your net promoter score? What is it? But know what it is and then be proud of it. Know how to speak about it.
Yes. And the other part that you said is the data, it needs to be objective, not subjective. It needs to be consistent, because people will talk about the data, but what are the components that go into that are objective? And that's what we live, breathe, and eat. Is at one place is making sure that it's objective data that's measurable, that's time specific, and then you can begin to look, as we talked about before, those trends. And I 100% agree with you that our stakeholders do expect that data. And if we're not providing it for them, they're going out to find it anyhow.
Yep.
So it actually is part of our unique selling proposition as a school that when you have these metrics, when you have this data that's objective, that's time specific, that you can show where you're headed, it gives a sense of comfort. And it's also usable, of course, internally. So our external stakeholders, internal stakeholders. And as we had already talked about before, continuous improvement. I do want to just ask one more question of you that I thought of as you were speaking. So, as we're capturing this data, I know a trend in early education is to move to a digital environment. And so, data is one thing where you might have it on a spreadsheet or on a piece of paper. The quicker we can get that data into a form that we can use it, the better able we are to anticipate. So, what do you see happening with that? I know we're making strides toward digitizing in different areas and even curriculum in some situations, but I'd love to hear your thought about that and its role.
Well, I think that I can give you a couple examples, right? So I was thinking immediately, I went to multi site and how important it is for digital data collection, because who wants to try and aggregate 200 individual spreadsheets into some and who's got the time or the knowledge to do that? Not me, right? I had to have somebody extra special to do that. And so I'm so grateful for the technology that has been developed that allows me to collect data at individual sites and then move that data into bigger chunks so that I can see what's happening across multiple schools, or I can see what's happening across multiple states. Or, what I love even more than that is how so much of this technology allows me to dig in to a certain demographic, right? So I can see,
Yes.
how are things in the threes, or how are things in the science center happening,
Yes.
right? Or what is my investment in cleaning supplies for bathrooms versus kitchens versus, technology just allows us to take these huge sheets of data and break it into these nuggets that I can actually make decisions around, because that spreadsheet is not going to be something I carry to Sam's Club to decide what product I want to buy. But if I have a little nugget about cleaning products, then I can do a little research on cleaning products and make a quick decision and move on, right? I love that. I also love that the technology allows us to come to those common understandings of quality indicators, right? If I am using some system that I have created, I may believe it is objective, but it is still 100% informed by my idea of environment and my idea of quality and my idea of safety and sanitation. But when we start to develop technology, we have to have stakeholders that bring all of their experiences in,
Yes.
and that technology becomes the objective party, right? Because we're able to then look apples to apples and oranges to oranges, which I think is important for me as an individual in my organization, but also critical for our industry, because we all want to be held to that highest standard of quality, and it needs to look the same no matter what state we're in, or who our
Yeah.
demographic is, right? We want to know what best is, because we all want what's best, and it
Yes.
starts by having technology bring us all together with that common understanding. The other thing, Lynn, one more second, that technology does for us in terms of efficiencies is, and how much time do we spend with paper these days? And imagine if we could use technology to get rid of that paper, that parents fill out one digital application, and holy moly, all of their demographic then goes to your business account. It goes to the child's application account. It goes
Yes.
to their portfolio, like and so all of that time that we spend today on the minutiae of operations, if we can digitize it and use technology to become more efficient, that time saved can then be placed into really building the relationships and the connections and the sustainable characteristics of our high quality.
Outstanding. I think that we'll park it there for this particular episode. And we know that our industry is sharing more and more around those indexes and what does quality look like. I think that the last several years have taught us to say, let's come together and share what best looks like because we're looking at it with fresh eyes. And that's one of the things that makes me so enthusiastic about continuous improvement and the strides that we're making and the fact that it's on the front stage along with other things as well. But Jamie, thank you so much for this conversation around
Oh,
operational
thank you.
efficiencies, quality, continuous improvement. And we look forward to having you on a future episode where we can dig into some of these other areas that you brought up. So thank you again for your expertise and your time.
Thank you. And thanks for having me.